Lovecraft said of Edgar Allan Poe, "Poe has probably influenced me more than any other one person. If I have ever been able to approximate his kind of thrill, it is only because he himself paved the way by creating a whole atmosphere and method which lesser men can follow with relative ease." The reason that Poe stood out so much amid his contemporaries in Gothic fiction was how he avoided the easy track of ghosts and vampires and the like, and instead used the psychology of terror in his works such as The Telltale Heart perhaps being the most obvious. The impact of this upon Lovecraft's own work is obvious, since madness and the mythos go hand in hand, that confronting these things is more than the human mind can handle. Poe took Gothic horror and worked to move it beyond the establishment. Lovecraft reached similar conclusions, that what is by far more effective than the impossible is the unimagined but plausible, even if stretched. As he put it, not to contradict human knowledge, but to supplement it. But getting back to Poe, a particular note is his only completed novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. The work covers a long voyage and even includes a trip to Antarctica, and includes a strange cry of Tekalili by the natives, but then at the end cried from the mouths of strange white birds. Poe himself later described the book as silly, but Lovecraft clearly respected it enough to have Danforth quote from it early on. I bring up Poe now because this is the section of the book when it starts to transition into the horrific, as illustrated by one of the classic tropes, the flickering light. Now, we haven't actually reached that point yet, but it is alluded to by Dyer as he begins this section noting that battery life, even with backups, has become a concern for them, and that they'll have to be more careful going forward lest they be trapped in the darkness. Before this, all of these were historic ruins, but now it's slowly becoming a tomb of a dead civilization that may still have some evil slouching about it. What horrifies Dyer and Danforth first is, ironically, the familiar, the smell of gasoline. It's something common to the point of being mundane, but as horrifying for them to discover as perhaps it might be for us to enter a newly unearthed pyramid and finding a fresh Snickers bar on the floor inside, something with no business being where it is. They discover why, as they finally find the 3 missing sledges, carrying a variety of items from the camp, including the perfectly preserved bodies of a sled dog and Gedney. There is no longer any room to speculate on any other possibility, and it is one thing to admire a fallen civilization, but it's quite another to be an intruder in the home of an alien being whose first reaction may be to murder you as preemptive self-defense. But they are not what the pair next encounter. It's a giant penguin, 6 feet tall. It is, of course, no threat to them, but its presence and the revelation that it isn't alone means that there's food here to keep them alive. And since they're blind albinos, it's unlikely they're getting their food from outside for themselves. If they're still living, does that mean that something else is here to keep the domesticated beasts from starving? There's no answer, for 4 of the elder ones from the camp are found to be dead, a sight which grows more unsettling until Danforth screams from the revelation. During the long history of the Elder Ones, their Shoggoths had gained intelligence and rebelled against their creators and masters. Rather than the common trope of being on the side of the wronged and subjugated, or of the tampering with what we don't understand applied to their decision to create a slave race, this is instead portrayed as a travesty that is rightly stopped. The reason for the Shoggoths was to allow society to reach its pinnacle, that by removing the need for manual labor, the Elder Ones would be free to pursue a life devoted to the previously discussed art and intellect. The Shoggoth uprising thus threatens what it is to make the Elder Ones great, rather than remaining as the tools that they were created to be. Recall that they were made to be mindless, not that they were created as an intelligent slave race. The purpose of the Shoggoth is the same for our own technology, yet our society was seen as being decadent by Lovecraft, remember? Well, recall that the later artwork of the Elder Ones also showed that they had become decadent. This may be to show that technology, whether it's mechanical or biological, should be used in the pursuit of the highest faculties, which promotes enlightenment, rather than base desires and sloth, which promotes degeneration. What this rebellion does to invoke Danforth's scream is that the Shoggoth's typical means to dispatch an Elder One was to decapitate it. And while the corpses before them are mangled, the commonality in their wounds is that all of them are missing their heads. The two men soon find themselves in a desperate escape from the caverns and abandoned city as they are pursued by a still living and hostile Shoggoth, calling out and aping of its masters, Tekalili. This and others like it are what Dyer suspects brought down the civilization of the Elder Ones in Antarctica, and thus you can appreciate the horror on both levels. First, that Elder Ones that so easily slaughtered the humans and dozens of dogs at the camp were so easily taken to pieces by a lone Shoggoth. And second, the realization that a species which once waged a war against powerful invaders from other worlds was brought down in the end by these, although the previously mentioned degeneration may have been a contributing factor. As for the monster itself, it's significant to note how Lovecraft is built up to its revelation. An amorphous thing chasing them is terrifying, but what he has done is spent a great deal of time explaining to us what it is and why it should exist. It is not a monster for the sake of a monster. We know why and how it was created, and understand the great purpose that it is put to. Being a tool doesn't make it less terrifying, any more than a chainsaw is less terrifying if it's being used to menace someone. What it does is take it and turn it into something malevolent. The Shoggoth is, in one sense, the robot gone amok, perhaps best illustrated by Danforth muttering about the subway back home as they go, the pursuing Shoggoth like an out-of-control train, even running down the penguins rather than consuming them as one might have guessed. The menace and implication of the Shoggoths are horrifying already, and enough of a reason in and of themselves to be wary of ever returning. But what convinced Dyer was the thing that drove Danforth over the edge. In their study of the degenerating Elder One's art, the two had learned something about a mountain range arising overnight behind their own mountains, something that terrified them awful. This, it's suggested, is what Danforth saw, the true mountains of madness, since the very sight of them did indeed drive him mad. What is it? Lovecraft doesn't directly say. Most likely Kadath, the home of the dream gods of Earth, which seems to not really be fixed in any one place, hence why it could just turn up one day. Kadath is naturally prominent in The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, but it also is mentioned in an obscure story called The Mound, obscure because it was ghost-written by Lovecraft, and when it had been published, it almost always was heavily abridged. But reference is made to the home of the old creatures being in the mountains near Kadath, a likely reference to the fallen city featured here. Something about seeing Kadath, or something within Kadath, seems to trigger something in Danforth, who begins babbling about things from the Necronomicon. The true reason, then, that Dyer is trying to discourage this expedition isn't because of the Elder Ones, and not likely that of the Shoggoth. It is because whatever might be there is likely far worse than that. At the Mountains of Madness is densely written in parts, but it shows Lovecraft really fleshing out a fictional race, from biology to culture, more than any of his other works save for The Shadow Out of Time. It is noted by some for dragging the whole of the mythos from the supernatural into the realm of science, in keeping with the previously remarked view that things should supplement rather than contradict what science has revealed. At the Mountains of Madness is certainly a remarkable tale, and no wonder it remains one of Lovecraft's most famous works.